Town of Marana.
Rod Lane with ADOT.
Catherine Skinner, Pima County.
Jose Rodriguez, Town of Oro Valley.
Jamie Brown with PAG.
Paul Casartano, Cleveland County DOT.
Carolyn Laurie with PAG.
James Dow, PAG RTA.
Sam Credio, City of Tucson. We also have 5 online. I don't know if you want to call them out and have them introduce themselves.
Sure. We have Mark Hoffman.
Good morning, Mark Hoffman, ADOT Multimodal Planning.
We have Steve Spade.
Hi, this is Steve Spade, Suntran.
We have Davida Mueller.
Hi, Davida Mueller with Suntran.
Hello, Jason Vahe, Pasquayaki Tribe.
Natalie Shep.
Hi, I'm Natalie Shep. I'm with Pima County Department of Environmental Quality.
Looks like Thomas Garcia has joined us as well.
Yes, Thomas Garcia with the town of Sarita.
That's everyone. Did I miss anybody?
Yes, Mark Novak, University of Arizona.
Others?
I'm here, David Zinda from PAG.
Please, David.
All right. Great. Thank you very much. We'll move on to item 2, in-kind reporting. Jeanette Duren.
Hi, good morning, everyone. Regional transportation planning efforts are enhanced by reporting time donated by attendees, volunteers, and participants. PAG collects data on the time dedicated to meetings and activities to apply for use as matching funds for grants and federal dollars. If you are paid with federal dollars, please let us know. Time spent in preparation for this meeting will be estimated by PAG staff who are knowledgeable of the agenda and meeting materials. At the conclusion of this meeting, the session report will automatically calculate your time spent in this meeting. Time spent working on PAG RTA initiatives, programs, and special projects may also be eligible for consideration for matching funds. Please sign our in-kind form if you haven't already. It looks like it went around, but if you haven't signed it, please let us know.
Great. Thank you, Jeanette. We'll move on to item 3, approval of the June 21st, 2023 meeting summary. Have you all had a chance to review the meeting summary? Do you have any questions or comments? All right, hearing none, do I have a motion to approve?
Motion to approve.
Motion, is there a second?
Second.
Seconded. Who is it?
Sounded like Tommy. Was that Tommy?
Yeah, that was me.
All right. We have a motion and a second. Any discussion? All right, hearing none. All in favor say aye. Aye.
Aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Any abstentions? All right, meeting summary approval passes. Let's move on to item 4. This item is fiscal year 2022-26 Transportation Improvement Program Amendment 2022.070. Carolyn Laurie.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, members of the committee. Good morning. This morning, we're requesting the Transportation Planning Committee to recommend approval of an amendment to PAG FY 22-26 Transportation Improvement Program, which would program Arizona Department of Transportation or ADOT Regional HERP 26 funds in FY 24 on tip number 10.18 for Pima County Sunset I-10 River Project. The funding amount is proposed at $1,814,000 of regional HERP. This would be a new funding source for the project, and ADOT has confirmed that the funding source is available. Are there any questions?
Questions? Jose?
Hey, Kevin, can you give us a little summary? What was the shortfall in this project? Another way, I think the bids came in higher than the insurance estimate. I just can't remember what that was.
Sure. So of course, this project is combined with the ADOT's main widening project. So they're all in one contract. The portion that was attributed to the sunset was around 4.4 million. So we've covered it with a combination of federal funds and then this remaining portion. This portion is unique because it's really the parts that would have had to be built with the widening project, even if we hadn't caught up. So it's that western abutment of the UPRR, which is
integrated with that, retaining walls for the ramps for Sunset. That, if that makes sense. They're
So the
right adjacent.
the wall, the bridge, the western abutment for the bridge that goes over the railroad is within ADOT right of way. And it is within the footing or the area of the MSC walls. So regardless of whether the funding or those projects were combined, ADOT would have constructed that abutment. Because if it would have been delayed, we would have had to remove a large portion of the wall in order to construct it at a later date. So we have always intended to put that footing and that abutment in place, whether or not the Sunset project was there. And we had talked about funding it this way prior to that occurring. So this is really just a finalization of that process that we had talked about years ago to build that abutment as part of Project Original. That makes sense?
Makes sense.
Right. Any other questions for Carolyn? You have a comment more of than a question. I see that there's the 536,000 of CRISA funds allocated to this project. Those funds were originally on a City of Tucson project, U of A 2nd Street, that we were not able to obligate last fiscal year. I understand that ADOT withdrew those funds from the city project and applied them to ADOT's project because you could obligate them. I do just want to point out that that leaves a hole for the U of A 2nd Street project. So I'm sure at some point in time we'll have that conversation. We just wanted to point it out that that's where those CRISA funds were. That's where they came from.
Mr. Chair, thank you. That's a reasonable assumption. I mean, the challenge we had was the potential or the significant potential of losing those funds. So in order to retain those funds within the region, they were transferred. So I realized there was an impact, but I think retaining the funds was a priority in that decision making.
Thanks, Rod. And I would agree with you. I'm glad that we were able to retain those funds for the region, and I'm sure we'll resolve the other project at a later date. Yeah. Any other questions, comments on this item before we call for a motion? Any online? All right, do we have a motion to approve?
Motion to approve.
Motion, is there a second?
Second.
A motion and a second. Any discussion? Hearing none. All those in favor say aye.
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 Okay.
Aye.
Any opposed? Motion passes unanimously. Thank you. We'll move on to item 5, Regional Mobility and Accessibility Plan Update. Jeanette Duran.
Right, thank you, Sam, members of the TPC. The RMAP is moving along. As you know, we mentioned at our June meeting that we were going to open the RMAP Project Explorer and invited all of you to go in there and start adding projects. We did do that in July, and we also held a training a few weeks after that to give you guys an opportunity to meet with us and ask questions and see if there was any assistance you needed. We had a really good turnout and really did want to thank you guys for participating in that. A lot of good questions, and I think that went really well. We have noticed that some of our jurisdictions have not gone in there yet. So if you're struggling to use it, please let us know right away. We're happy to meet with you one-on-one or anybody on your team and help you guys get your projects loaded in Explorer. The deadline to do that is next month, I believe the 22nd. Yeah. And so we will be following up with you, whether you like it or not. But yet again, if you need help with that effort, let us know. We're here to assist you and make sure that we get those projects in. I think the deadline is after the next TPC, so you'll probably get another reminder if you haven't gone in there already. Also, if you have new staff that are new to the scene, someone whose name we might not recognize, shoot me an email so that I know who that person is. If it's not a recognizable person from your team, I'll probably reach out to you just to ensure that that's a person that needs to be in the Explorer. So other than that, our schedule is of course changing again based on the decision for the RTA ballot election. So that it's good that a decision has been made on that project, so it will help us solidify our schedule, which are working on now. Ideally, our project list will hopefully be done sometime by the end of this year. And then we'll be wrapping up the entire RMAP project by the end of next year. So as we see the light coming at the end of the tunnel, we'll definitely keep you guys posted. We did have a pop tech meeting last week. Really good discussion on the population projections. The sub-county population projections were approved by regional council at their last meeting. And now we're breaking it down into the smaller geographies so that Sue and his team can start using that for the modeling efforts. So I wanted to thank Sue's team for all that work, and also to your staffs for participating. It was really interesting. We usually see a lot of staff from your development services group, but we did see some familiar faces from the transportation group. So that was really nice to see participation all the way around. And that's all I have on RMAP unless you have any questions.
Thank you, Jeanette. Any questions on RMAP? Paul?
So a couple questions. Thanks for the update. We are taking the approach to getting projects into the database a little bit differently. And part of that has been prompted by the more frequent reference that we're hearing to RMAP being a full representation of the region's needs. And so as I've kind of looked back at individual jurisdictions, projects in both the in-plan and reserve, I'm having a little bit of difficulty reconciling that the $1.2 billion total project list of Pima County represents all of Pima County's needs. So we're trying to take more of a concerted effort to make sure that we're checking that a little bit more thoroughly so we can get it at least closer to representing the needs. I don't know that I would go as far as to say it absolutely captures all the region's needs. So that's just something I kind of want to go on record with. So that's in part why we haven't really gone in there to flitter around with projects and whatnot. We kind of want to get our ducks in a row a little bit so that we can understand what are the full scale bridge needs for Pima County, for example, all the way through 2055. What does the scope and scale of that look like? What are the replacements? What are the rehab repairs? And at least get a little closer than the number that's in there for that kind of line item for county, which might not be anything at this point. So we're taking a little bit of a different approach. The deadline shouldn't be too terribly problematic. It will be planning level cost estimate type of information, which then raises another concern with the gap that we're seeing between the original cost estimates generated by the jurisdictions for RTA Next and what we're seeing coming out of HDR. There's quite a chasm there that exists. So we're going to think about how we use the planning level cost estimate tool within RMAP, because I don't necessarily think it's always going to get us close enough to where we need to be with cost estimates. So we're taking that with a grain of salt for sure. So those are two things. And then I wanted to hear where we might be with the performance metric stuff and when that might be coming into the dialogue for TPC and how it's going to be injected into the project list or any other reporting piece of RMAP.
Sure, both good points. Thanks, Paul. In regards to the work you guys are doing, putting the list together, we appreciate that because obviously the more work you guys put into that, the more accurate it is. Recognizing, yeah, the situation we're seeing with the RTA Next cost estimates. I mean, yeah, we feel the divide there as well. So ideally, the jurisdictions will have looked at, you'll have looked at your projects and the results that are coming in from that and make some decisions on those. And we'll use what you guys feel are the most accurate to reflect the project costs. If you guys want to go with that RTA Next cost estimate that that HDR put together, or some other cost estimate based on what your plans are for a project, that's completely at your discretion to do so. But yes, thanks for putting a lot of consideration into that. That's what ultimately makes it a good project list. Performance measures, yes, we're updating a lot of the data sets right now. And so those will come back into the picture as we move towards wrapping up the project list. So we know that like those discussions are going to have to start before we close the project list, right? We're going to want to see what's happening as those projects get put in. So those will start, you know, towards after the effort that you guys put in, probably September, we'll start revisiting that towards the end of the year, but they'll happen like simultaneously at the end. We will look at them before we solidify the actual project list.
I guess, you know, if I had my druthers, I would have appreciated the opposite in part, because I like to inform the project, you know, identification process with the data, the best available data that we know. That being said, our process is not going to be like too data driven. It's going to be needs driven for sure, but we don't have the benefit of kind of coming off of the move Tucson. And unfortunately, I think Marana's at that point where they're not quite where they ideally would like to be with their transportation master plan. It would be really nice to say, here's our master plan. We're ready to put our projects right into RMAP, but hopefully they're a little bit closer.
Yeah.
So challenges for sure. Thank you. Do you have a feeling for whether or not the initial 107 projects or whatever the number was that were submitted for RTA Next? Are you seeing those getting put into the project list? Is there an anticipation that the full submission of projects for RTA Next call for projects is going to be in RMAP, either in plan or reserve? So it can then be pointed to if any of those are plucked out or decide to go on the ballot.
The assumption would be that because the jurisdiction submitted those 108 projects, that over the course of 30 years, they would be a priority. Otherwise, they probably wouldn't have been submitted. So we haven't seen a whole lot of activity in the portal at all. You know, we've seen people logging in and making little changes, but we do anticipate seeing all, or at least the majority of those projects showing up. Certainly some of them will end up in the out years or on the reserve list, but we'll see where that shakes out as you guys get in there. And as we said at the training, we can go ahead and do a batch upload. So if you guys know that you want your RTA Next projects in there, at least as a starting point, let us know, because Peter can go in and just add them out of the gate rather than you having to go in and add each one manually. If we do that, you can still go in and make changes. So you can change the cost, change the scope, but it's kind of a nice starting point because it's easier to work with what's there than have to construct.
Do they need to make an official request, or can you just upload them?
Would you like us to? Okay.
There's only two in Norval, so yes.
Okay. You got it, Jose.
Head start on all you guys.
Just one more. I know I had brought up the multi-jurisdictional region-wide projects last time. You guys have a game plan for how those will get in? Because I think some of those may be in the individual jurisdictions lists in terms of like, you know, whether it be pavement management, you know, pavement rehab stuff or traffic signal improvements or what have you. So I'm not quite sure. We'll probably try to get a sense of what our needs are through 2055 for those types of categories. But I don't know if that's going to be the same approach for each jurisdiction, and then you just stack those on top of each other, or how you come up with a region-wide number for signal improvements, or what should be in a complete streets region-wide project that is essentially the parent project we can all point to and say, we're going to do this complete street work on this roadway. That's the parent project in the long range plan that we're.
Yeah, our intent is to have them just like that as a region-wide pot of money. So pavement's a good example. So most of the jurisdictions know how much you're spending on pavement, and at least in the next 5 to 10 years. And then if we have to, you know, come up with a number that represents a 30-year investment, we can do that. But yeah, we anticipate having those similar categorical kind of spending buckets represent a region-wide investment versus having sort of fragmented, you know, dollars for each jurisdiction for like categories.
So I think, currently in RMAP, I wouldn't necessarily say that those represent a region-wide need. And I think of like, arterial traffic management, those types of things where there's just like a number of $30 million on there. And I don't think that is representative of all of the arterial traffic management needs from, traffic control center to signals to whatever it is. So I'm not sure how to deal with that. We can cross that as we get to it.
Any other questions? Questions online?
It's like Natalie might have a question.
Natalie?
Yes, I do have a question. So this is the first time I'm actually going through this process, so I'm just a little naive to how it all works. I'm curious how the Justice 40 initiative falls into the decision-making of these plans, because we are tasked with trying to ensure under Justice 40 that 40% of our projects are benefiting low-income and disadvantaged communities, and we now have a tool to identify those communities. So I'm wondering when that analysis is being done. Is that on the jurisdictions to do? Is that on PAG to do? And how is that incorporated into our decision-making process?
Sure, that's a good question. Thanks, Natalie. And there's kind of a twofold answer. One is it is going to be, we are going to use that tool, that federal tool that's come out. We've already been in there and testing it and trying to determine the best way to use that. There's a lot of Justice 40 components that are going to come out of the activity-based model. So Hansu and his team are going to be looking at that as well, along with Hannah and I as we work through that. But this is really the first time that we've used that ABM and trying to figure out the best way to do that. To say it's on the shoulders of PAG or on the shoulders of the jurisdiction, I think it's on everybody's shoulders to make sure that we're meeting the intent of Justice 40. We certainly hope that when you guys are adding projects into the long range plan that you have that lens on and you're thinking about those investments, making sure that your communities aren't carrying the burden or the benefits aren't being distributed across the board. We will look at those things at a regional level, but we're not going to analyze each individual project to see what the impacts of that one individual project are. We defer that to the jurisdictions to do that level analysis, but we will be looking at the whole package and what it means for Justice 40 and Title 6. That happens after the project list is solidified, then we'll start looking at those components.
Can you remind us, is the EJ40 layer in the RMAP Project Explorer? Because that may be helpful as we're adding projects to see.
I'd have to go back and look at the RMAP. I know it's in the RTA next one. So if it's not in RMAP right now, we can certainly get that in. It's going to be the layer. It would probably be just the identified disadvantaged communities. There's a layer that's out there that shows how many criteria each area meets in that those disadvantaged criteria. I think there's 9 total, and it splits it out. So we were looking at last week if we can pull that out and use that, incorporate that into our tools. So it's something that we're trying to get in there. At a base, we can get in just areas that are identified as disadvantaged, but we'd like to pull as much detail into it than just simple identification.
Any other questions, comments? Thank you, Natalie. Any other?
I had one follow-up. I don't know whether it could be helpful to actually bring some guidance and training to this committee on that process. I'm not sure where everybody's at with just general knowledge and know-how with the tool and what we should be looking at. So it is something that maybe this committee could take on, as there might be some education that needs to happen there.
Natalie, you're talking about the Justice 40 tool?
Yes.
That's something, Jeanette.
And we can look into that.
Okay.
Yeah. There's been a lot of work done by SunCloud as well in this area, so we can reach out to them as well and see. provide you guys.
Great, thank you. Thank you, Natalie. Any other questions? All right, hearing none, we'll move on to item 6. Thank you, Jeanette. Item 6 is Regional Transportation Revenues Update, James Tao. That's what it says here. Okay.
I thought it was last, so sorry.
That's it. Last item.
Is it? Oh,
Yeah,
that's
yeah.
good. So good morning, thank you, Mr. Chair. So yes, I'm providing today's revenues update. Following page 2 of the revenues memo in your packet, the FY 2023 adopted budget projection was just over $107 million in excise tax. And we finished the fiscal year with nearly $119 million in TPT revenue, or 7.9% higher than excise tax revenues in fiscal year 22, which were slightly over $110 million. Moving to HERF in table 1 of the revenues report, through June of this year, our total distribution was nearly $180 million, or an increase of nearly 3% over fiscal 22, and about 12.5% higher than the 5-year average. This includes 12.6, 2.6, and direct HERF allocations. In table 2 of the report, it focuses on HERF 12.6 with ADOT FY 2023 forecast of just over 27 million, with actuals of almost 29 million, or 6.6% higher than projected, and 8.5% higher than the previous fiscal year. Moving to table 3, with HERF 2.6, we see FY 2023 actuals of just over 6.4 million, or 15.3% higher than the ADOT forecast of 5.6 million. HERF 2.6 distribution exceeded previous fiscal year distributions by 16.4%. And in table 4, 12.6 balances, they continue to increase and are now just over $69 million, or a year-over-year increase of 56.5%. And table 5 with Pima County gas sales, wrapping up fiscal 23, county gas sales continue to hover around 13% of statewide sales, as they have over the past several years. In figure 2, you'll notice a spike in March of this year and a decline in June. There were no obvious errors, and as mentioned, the final percentage was in line with past years. So that concludes the update. Happy to answer questions.
Questions?
I have some questions, Sam.
All right, go ahead,
Thanks. So on the HERF 12.6, which I've asked about previously, when will we have updated tables showing fiscal year 24 now that we're in fiscal year 24? And then also, I guess my follow-up to that is, it would appear that there's 12.6 that's not programmed at this point. I looked at the rollover amendment for the 12.6, and it looks like there could be anywhere in the neighborhood of $8 to $14 million unprogrammed. So I'm wondering what the process will be for a call for projects this cycle.
Well, I think I'd defer to Jamie.
Sure. If I may, with regard to your question about unprogrammed HERF 12.6, we're going to be bringing that forward to the TIP subcommittee when we resume our TIP development process. We anticipate having meetings in September on that.
Oh, okay.
And I'm sorry, could you please remind me of your first question?
When will the tables be updated for fiscal 24?
Oh, in the
forecast?
packet?
Mhm.
We want to stay consistent. We actually didn't have July numbers for the packet, so it should be the next iteration of this packet.
Because I think, and I assume that would be the case, we're kind of closing out 23, we'll get to 24.
Right.
I believe we're still at the 23 million that we programmed for 12.6 in fiscal year 24, which is, what was it, 6 million less than we actually collected in 23. So this is where I'm glad we're starting the call for projects. Do we anticipate that we'll be waiting until there's a new TIP document to actually get it on projects? And if that's the case, do we know when we're going to adopt a TIP?
Might be getting a little bit off topic here, though I should keep my remarks limited, but I guess it does pertain to the revenues. So we anticipate starting the TIP subcommittee process for the FY 24 through 28 TIP development process that we started last year. And at that time, we're going to update the tables and go through programming discussions for first federal funding. And then once we solidify federal funding for not just 24 through 26, but also 27 and 28, we'll then turn our attention to HERF that becomes available as we shift this SDBG around, but also any unprogrammed HERF. So at that time, in those meetings starting in September, we'll have updated HERF 12.6 for projects as part of the RTA, primarily the RTA roadway element project list. Keep in mind, please, that we use the ADOT's 10-year official forecast for HERF, and we don't expect to get that for the PAG distribution until mid to late October, but we'll continue to move through the process regardless. And we can update those final numbers once we get that official HERF forecast. So that's what we're planning, and we'll have more to share in September.
I had one last question. It just was with the gas sales table. The last entry point seems like it's quite off trend for like June numbers.
Does.
Did we, oh, and the March number had also been really high. So I don't know, have we looked into that?
So yeah, as I stated, that there was nothing obvious, but sales for the year did show a 13%, and that's in line with previous years. I can look into it further, but Jimmy, if you have anything to add to that.
I mean, Mr. Chair, real quick, just to add to James's comments. So we saw a spike several months ago. It was noticed by committees, and we also, as part of the HERF report that we get, have corrections at the end of the report. And so we'll continue to monitor that. That spike that we saw was actually an error of reporting of gasoline from Costco, large amount of Costco gas sales. That was corrected, so we updated the report. And if this is an error, you'll see it corrected in future reports.
Great. Thanks, Catherine. Other questions on this item? Online, questions? I do have one question on the, I know you provided the RTA revenue totals. Do you have an accounting of the current RTA fund balance you can share with us?
So I haven't looked at that the last few days. The most recent number that comes to mind is about 200 million.
Any other questions? All right, thank you very much, James. That leads us to item 7, future agenda items. Do we have any future agenda items?
Well, it sounds like next month we'll hear about the TIP process, but for sure, I think that'd be a good item to have on there.
Okay. Update on TIP process. Any other agenda items we'd like to discuss? Online, anybody?
I would just reiterate that maybe a presentation on Justice 40 and the tool and some education would be a helpful future agenda item.
Oh, I have one more, Mr. Chair. I know that Management Committee had asked that the Country Club project, when it came off the RTA Next roadway list, be programmed for our discussion at this committee on grants we might be able to go after. So I think we need to keep that on the list for a future agenda item.
Yeah, thank you, Catherine. I did see that note. Do you know if there's any grants coming up that makes this one time sensitive to have the conversation?
I'm not aware of any. I think we need to start thinking about, now that we've gone through, at least one full cycle, 2 cycles with the IIJA, we have an idea of which of the grants this might be best aligned for, and that might be a good discussion, so we're prepared when that call comes out.
Great. Any others? All right, hearing none, we'll move to item 8, adjournment. Do I have a motion to adjourn?
So moved.
Second. All in favor?
Aye.
Aye. All right,
Aye.
meeting adjourned at 9:34. Thank you, everyone. Thank you.
Thanks, Sam.